What is the science of reading? What are leaders doing to accelerate reading achievement? We answer these questions and more in Science of Reading Leadership, Guiding Minds, Transforming Lives, powered by Just Right Reader.
Welcome to the podcast today. We have an incredible episode and an incredible guest today. We are welcoming Dr. Barbara Mullen, who has been the superintendent of the Rush Henrietta Central School District in suburban Rochester, New York since April of 2023. Before joining Rush Henrietta, Dr. Mullen served as the assistant superintendent of the Office of Student Services for Cambridge Public Schools in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There, she led successful efforts to accelerate student learning, promote equity and achievement, and prepare students for meaningful careers. A deliberate and confident advocate for all students, Dr. Barbara Mullen is a student-centered leader who always seeks ways for her organization to improve. We are thrilled to have you, Dr. Mullen. Welcome.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you all today.
Wow, what a jam-packed bio, like introduction, and that isn't even the full bio. So tell us a little bit about how you got into education and how you moved into your role as superintendent at Rush Henrietta Central School District.
Sure. So I am a storyteller by spirit, right? Like if I had to talk about the thing I love the most, it is telling stories. My kids don't have to twist my arm to tell them stories. They usually say, "Read me a story," but I just put the book aside and I just make up stuff, right? And so I love to tell stories. So I started as an actual mass communication major. My undergraduate degree was in journalism and public relations. My very first job was actually with Black Entertainment Television and Viacom. I went into public relations for consumer brands like Yum, etc., KFC, Tory Burch. I was an early PR little peon for that organization. And so I love telling a story, and I loved communicating. And so I actually went into education because the way in which I was learning how to tell stories and doing public relations, etc., for brands didn't quite align with like my lived experience and my moral compass and how I was raised in my identity with my family. Both of my parents are educators, and education leaders. And so it felt like the right thing, but for the wrong thing, right? It felt like the right thing to do, but for the wrong industry. And so I left working at consumer brands and went to just substitute teach. But I ended up loving special education and rolling into that, and just progressively felt the need to continue to tell a story for a group of students and advocate for a group of students who I think their story is always told for them, or it's really misunderstood. People don't really understand the ways in which students who have learning disabilities or various barriers to their learning have exceptional exponential potential, but just nobody really knows their story. And so I really closely intertwine my own journey and my own story with theirs and advocating for students. And it really just became and blossomed from students with disabilities to every child who has a unique journey or story. And that has just over the last 16 years turned itself into, being a special education teacher to now being a superintendent of schools.
That's fascinating. What a really fascinating story.
Lots of little fun pit stops along the way.
I love hearing that. I love hearing people who have a different start and make their way to education. And now, you leading an entire school district. That's incredible. Tell us a little bit more about Rush Henrietta, about the school district in general.
Sure. So we are what we call our first ring suburb right outside of Rochester City Schools. Rochester City rather, we abut the community, but we also we're a consolidated district. And so we have about 4 municipalities. Rush, which is a rural farm community. We have Henrietta, which is the first ring suburb. And then we have Brighton, a little bit of Brighton, which is a suburb. And then we have Pittsford, which is also a suburb. And so we have a variety of students. We have about 5,600 students that we serve. We are such a diverse district. We're literally 48% students of color. There's 100 different languages. I just learned of a different language like literally this week. And I was like, Rami, what is that? Like, I looked it up and I was like, where country, who speaks that? And so we just have a variety of different families that we serve. from all over the world. Truly, Rochester being a sanctuary city, we bring families and they'll come and land there, and then they'll move out to Henrietta to really have support and build their forever community. And we love it. We welcome our families here. And then we have families that have been here for 100 years, right? They were some of the first early rural folks. We are a community of learners that are on the move. So we have a lot of innovative practices here. We're always looking for ways to really sharpen and expand our collective identity and our shared vision for our students. And we have some really exciting things happening. We're right in the middle of our strategic plan, Vision 2037. And a lot of times people don't make a strategic plan for 13 years. But much like the recipients of some of the work that we did with Just Right Reader, we are thinking about the next academic generation, and that is our UPK. So 2037 is the year when our current UPK graduate from high school, and we know that 13 years ago, school looked very different. So we are just beyond the moon excited about what schooling will look like 13 years from now, and we want to be ready to deliver on that promise for those learners too.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, that was a lot, right? So I'm trying to like break that down. You said 2037, and in my mind I was like, I wonder if she meant 2027. Like in my mind I was like 13 years. Like so let's talk about that. Like let's break that down, because you said what education will look like. You're trying to like kind of think about what that looks like. What does that also look like in terms of you preparing them for the careers that they'll have? Like for these meaningful careers, how are you pulling all of that in to create those wraparound services to make them prepared in those ways?
Yeah, so it's ambitious, but I think it's the right work, and I think it's the right conversation to have, because when you look at other systems, right, they don't plan for 4 years. It's very short-sighted. It's like some people do a 3-year strategic plan, some people do a 5-year strategic plan. Ours is 4 years, but it is a vision 2037. So it's planning for the first, we'll probably have 3 iterations, right? 12 years, and then maybe we'll do 5 here or 5 there. We'll get there. We'll figure the math out. But the reality of the situation is nobody could have, 2 big things happened over the last 4 years, right? COVID and the pandemic. Nobody could have anticipated how schooling was going to look, how home-centered schooling was going to look, how centered the schools were in a community, and how much communities relied on schools to be open for everything else in the community to work. And nobody really anticipated how huge of oxygen artificial intelligence would take up in the conversation across all sectors, right? ChatGPT, OpenAI came and like broke the internet, broke everything. Though we have been using artificial intelligence for many, many years, right? The way and how accessible and democratized it became as of, right, 2022, November 2022, it shook really that conversation. So those 2 really big phenomena happen, and schools were like, whoa, okay, tech is in the hands of families, it's at home, and now artificial intelligence is a thing, and what does that mean for education? And that was literally in the last 3 years. So if I were to just plan my strategic plan from 2020 to 2024, it would have already just been obsolete. To answer your question about employment, I don't know. I mean, we'll know we'll need bridges. We'll know we'll need the trades. We'll know we'll need certain, right, industries that are just part of the human condition. But how they show up and the skills that students will need and how they'll feel comfortable in those roles is different, right? The workforce development is not, school has never been about giving you a job. It has never been about that, right? It has been about giving you the tools to identify the thing that makes your heart soar. And that could be across 3 different industries, or in my case, 2, right? I was across 2 different industries, and I'm only 39 years old. So I can't even tell you if I have one more left in me, right? Like I might give you 20 years and that'll only make me 59. So I'm just might do something else. So we really have to have a way of thinking about the long-term game for our students, so that they're not just job consumers, they're job creators.
I love
Right?
it.
Like, can you create the industry? And did we do enough in preparing you for that? And literacy across multiple disciplines is part and parcel of that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I just texted I know I shouldn't text while I'm on a podcast, but I just texted my my little group chat of all my educator friends and said, I am interviewing the most coolest superintendent right now. I used a different word. I'm interviewing the coolest superintendent ever.
You are so sweet.
I just love that. Tell us a little bit more. You kind of started talking about, literacy across disciplines. And we'd love to kind of zero in on, the science of reading and that foundational literacy piece, and how you are ensuring all students in your district do learn how to read so that they have those foundational pieces to start to branch off into that multidisciplinary reading.
Yeah, so the science of reading is one of those things that I didn't know it was a thing until people said it was a thing. My mom is an educator. She started in the classroom in 1976, was her first year in the classroom. She's retired now. But she was in the classroom for almost 40 years, and she also didn't know it was a thing. We just thought it was reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a reading specialist by background, as by extension of becoming a special educator, because that is the like really big barrier for students oftentimes, right? That short-term memory recall, that visualization, crystallization, all those component skills that you need to build upon to learn reading are oftentimes barriers created by the cognitive right gaps presented by the disability. And so our job is like reading investigators as special educators. We're like, okay, what is your cognitive processes? Like, are you short-term, visual, whatever? And then you begin to really think about, okay, how do I fill in and kind of circumvent those areas so that you can learn those key areas of reading, and building those discrete skills around reading. And so we just always thought that that was how you did it, that was, there was phonics, there was thinking about, whole language to some degree, but there was thinking about some of those areas that you had to build upon, right? There was, right, really learning about the discrete sounds and the orthography and all of these other places where that was just part and parcel of teaching reading to kids. And one thing fundamentally we knew was that children will learn to read when they learn to read. Like, it's not an if, it's a when if you keep doing the things you need to do. As opposed to this kind of like, oh, I tried that for 5 weeks, it didn't work. I tried that for 5 weeks, so I'm just gonna go do something really random and like big flashy thing. Um, and so when we talk about the science of reading, I'm glad everyone is there, but I'm also very grateful that in Rush Henrietta, prior to me arriving, they had just been doing the building blocks of reading for a very long time. And there was some, because innovation goes hand in hand, I think, with, we have to be very careful when we talk about innovation. And I say that as an equity-centered superintendent who doesn't say the word very much. I don't say equity very much because I think people think it means something else than what it really means, which is good teaching and learning, right, for every child. And building your capacity to be a solid pedagogian, as opposed to like, I try stuff that I see on the internet all the time. And so when people get a population of students with disabilities, students from socioeconomic, students who might not have had a lot of language growing up very early, or have different language, they often say like, I've got to find some new innovative approach for kids. And it's like, well, maybe you do, or maybe you just need to think about how to authentically engage students in research-based, evidence-based practices. And so we had been doing that, and we are a district that's very innovative, but as opposed to saying we need to try some practice that is pie in the sky and not evidence-based, we have been saying we need to really think about innovative ways to have on-ramps for students into these evidence-based practices, which is very, very different than trying something that's not evidence-based. So I'm very proud to say that RH has had a very long-standing history of the early years, really making sure that the learning to read component of the science of reading has been something that was very, very important. The state of New York requires an intervention support, AIS support here. And so we are partially just following along and making sure we're compliant with that expectation that when students are demonstrating that they haven't mastered some of those foundational skills in reading, that there's already an immediate response to it. But I think one of the areas that we're proud about is our educators' capacity to really be able to see a student, know the skill gaps, know the areas that they're strong in, and build upon that for reading.
Again, like, I'm loving this conversation because as you're talking, I'm thinking of so many different questions. Like, I absolutely next want you to talk about, some of the challenges that you face. But another thing that like comes to my mind is you talk about, your teacher's capacity and students. Like, how are you bringing all of those things together to make sure everyone has that what they need? Like, how are you making sure that the teachers are prepared to do it and all? But let's start with, like, what challenges are you facing? Because I know a lot of our listeners are listening to you going, oh, I want to do all that you're saying. So how can they prepare to kind of do this lift, and what challenges should they think about or think through?
Yeah, so I would say two things. The first is very, very personal. So when my son entered first grade 2 years ago, he was reading at a pre-K level, and that means he was not reading. Let's put it out there, right? Like, he was not reading, he was not decoding. His letter sound recognition was like very, very low. And so I had a moment of, oh my gosh, like, my son, of all the children in all the world, my son is not going to be a reader. And I had no expectation of him reading at a certain age level. But you all know that the more you get to third grade and the more you get older and your identity begins to change, specifically as a Black boy, um, not being able to read in all of the different areas, right? Comprehension, he was solid on. Vocabulary, he was great. Decoding, just it wasn't there, right? If you told him a story, he could tell you everything, right? But the decoding, it was a struggle. And it's because he had ADHD, like, just attending to those functions were very difficult for him. And what I often would tell his teacher, his first teacher that he had, was, the language structure for him is not a struggle. The literacy knowledge is not a struggle. The word recognition, the phonological awareness, the decoding, the sight recognition is a struggle. Please do not discount language comprehension for word recognition. Leverage one for the other. My advice, and the way that you do that for students who don't have word recognition, you don't just drill and kill them, right? Like, there's very discrete ways that you build that word recognition, but the language comprehension is so adaptive. It is so relationship based. And that is where I get into the conversation about the adaptive, the internal motivation for especially an aging, struggling reader, right? You can cookie and incentivize, right, a pre-K kiddo, a kinder, even a first grader. But when you get to that, like, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year old who is still struggling with word recognition, you've got to build that trust, because it is such a, like, it's like if you're a grown up and you try, I mean, imagine trying to learn Spanish or another language. Imagine trying to do yoga and you fall out, right? There's a level of vulnerability in learning the word recognition components, right, of Scarborough's rope, that, like, truly you have to trust the person that is holding your hand through that process. And so what we've really encouraged our teachers to do, and the other thing I'll say is that for all we're talking about the science of reading, you have to understand language acquisition for English language learners, because that's what you're doing for native speakers, right? They have language comprehension, but they don't have the recognition. So you need to treat them just like you would treat any other English language learner. But then for those students who don't have language comprehension because English is not their first language, you need to also really understand that now you're doing twofold. And so all of the tried and true things that you might think that you're going to do with your letters training and your this and your that and science of reading this, you've got to now layer that and make sure you're working with your language acquisition or your language development experts to be sure that you're accommodating and supporting that piece. And so my one ask of all educators who are like, science of reading, we're going, woo, 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 I got this training and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, is not to forsake the relationship that is needed to help bring your older students along on this journey, because we left a whole generation behind on this foolishness. Like, name it and claim it and say it. And I know Sarah, and I know she will be okay with me saying that we left a generation, and that generation looks like a particular group of students, right? We left a whole generation behind with this, with trying and experimenting all kind of different stuff when we knew what it took to teach reading. And half of it is having a really great relationship with kids and helping them feel safe, that they can take a risk and that it's okay, that what you think it sounds like is not going to come out your mouth that way, and that's all right.
This episode is brought to you by Just Right Reader. Extend phonics instruction, strengthen school-home partnerships, and accelerate reading achievement with take-home decodable packs from Just Right Reader. Personalized take-home packs make phonics fun and accessible for families. Every book comes with a video phonics lesson and writing pages to help readers reinforce their decoding and writing skills. To learn more, visit justrightreader.com.
Dr. Mullen, you seem to have such a deep understanding of language acquisition and how kids actually learn to read. And we know that superintendents all over the country, they're coming from different backgrounds, right? In terms of the content and the grade level that they may be taught. And so this happens to be your really area of expertise. How do you think that has impacted the districts that you've led? Or, I know you haven't been at Rush Henrietta for a crazy amount of time yet, but or how do you foresee it impacting this district that you're leading now in a different way than another superintendent who has a different expertise?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that, right, superintendents' jobs are. So here's the like pain point for me, is that I can't touch this, right? I don't get to sit with kids and do like Wilson training or multisensory reading support, or I don't get to sit and like do it one-on-one with the kids, even my own. And again, that's my heart, right? It's like making sure my son is growing and all these other things. But one of the things the superintendent's job is to create the conditions for adults to do their best work. And for me, I actually really enjoy that piece. I love kids, but I love adults too. Like, I just love people. And so nothing is more gratifying than when groups of people can see each other's work, right? Because you in a district have one kid and you have hundreds of people all coming to work every day, operating, doing their little worker bees, right? On the behalf of one child, like to make sure the system all works for one child. So it's not like, well, I only support the special ed kids and I only support the other kids and I only support the reading kids. Well, that's every kid in the district. So my job is to really be able to understand how these systems are interdependent, right? Not just collaborating, but interdependent. It means that you cannot do your job without understanding how the other person does their job. And and there was one example, for example, I brought special educator, the special ed director, the director of literacy, and the director of math together to the table, and the English as a new language learner coordinator to the table. And I said, y'all have to, when we talk about specially designed instruction for special ed, you all need to be here, because you all need to know what your role is in rolling this out and explaining this to the Board of Education, like to people that don't understand any of this. And that is literally, they never sat down at the table before. They were like, Dr. Mullen, nobody's ever told us like to come and sit. And it wasn't that they were at odds, but if you are a building principal, you feel torn in a lot of different ways. So that's my other job, is to have the deputy at the table to say, and now this is how I'm coaching the principal to lift this work in the building and in the schools, right? Because everybody is moving and thinking their role is the most important and everybody's got to jump and do this, but the principal is hearing 4 different directions, right? So it's how I organize my district, it's how I organize my executive leadership team. It's how I'm listening for authentic entry points for each other to lift each other's work and know their work. And that lands undoubtedly in the way that students are taught every day. And so that really, I think, if superintendents I was on a funding call, right? But to me, that's just adding to my ability to create the conditions. So I know the budget, I know finance, I know operations, I know the buildings, I know capital plans. But if I don't understand how teaching and learning needs to move in the district, how they need to work together, then all of that other stuff is for nothing, because it won't have the impact on student learning that it needs to have.
And I think that right there is innovative thinking, right? Like that's 2037 thinking, right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So earlier you made the comment that there were two big things that happened, and one of them was the pandemic that created a home-centered education, right? Like that home-centered focus. And from that, what do you think that you've seen, or how are you supporting family literacy on this journey? Like, what's the role of the family now that we've come out of it? And what's the role of the family? And then how are you supporting them to be able to support you in this 2037 vision?
Yeah. So prior to 2020, rather, just much prior to 2037, but prior to 2020, I really worked with school districts to think about democratizing. Like, education is a part of the democracy, right? You're mostly appointed by an elected official on the school board, or you vote for your school board. We go to a commissioner who's appointed by a governor that parents vote for. So parents and community members have a voice in public education. They don't necessarily quite know exactly, and it's a little convoluted, but it is a democratic process through appointment and positions and all these other things. But it's still very mysterious to families, right? They still don't honestly feel like they have a voice for all of the ways they can vote and blah blah blah. They don't feel like they really have a decision making voice, or even, right, if they can't make a decision because they're not decision makers like I am, obviously, they still don't know what their actual role is in supporting education. They know when they don't like something and they speak up. They're usually very quiet and trust that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do in any other time. But my job was really to like demystify, pull the curtain back on it, so that we don't just hear from families when they're upset. Like, they truly feel like, wow, I can do something at home, or I understand what's happening with my kids, or I can give you information and say, like, Johnny's not feeling well today. And so, I want to make sure that I know what you're doing at school so I can make space for Johnny to do it at home, as they feel okay, or we see a lot of families, even me, like, I have an international trip, and I'm just like, man, it would be so cool to take my kid, but I need to make sure they're not missing something. I need to make sure they have this thing. And so families are increasingly doing that, like working remotely from other countries for a week, and they can do that and bring your kids. So they really need to have a better understanding of how we prioritize learning. So some of the ways that we've done that is really, like, of course, we'll have literacy nights at the schools. We'll have math, STEM, STEAM night at the school. I'm really talking about a curriculum that we're adopting for math. And normally my team is like, people don't really care about that. I said, well, they don't care because they don't know that they should care. Like, we need to tell them they should care about it. And talk about the ways that they can bring that in with their kids and things you're doing all the time, right? If you're always measuring food is a really great example, like, bring it in and talk about how that happens at school and at home. So our schools are doing some amazing parent and community engagement around instruction. I call it parents as instructional partners, and not just like your PTO, right? Like, let's do a monster bash. But then the other thing we did was, right, partnering with you all, partnering with Just Right Reader. As soon as I heard about the readers going home and the Decodables going home, I was like, this has to happen today. Namely because I want my son to have them. And he did. He got like buckets and buckets of them. But also, as he aged out and he didn't really need those readers anymore, I soon, like, he aged out, but then I came here and I was like, for sure, we're about to order some. And they loved them. I had emails from teachers. I had emails from parents. I had emails from the principal saying like it was like Christmas in July or Christmas in June when kids got these at home. And I just feel like we don't know. The other piece is we're a 40% free and reduced lunch district. That could be a lot of different things. But what it also means is that families are qualifying for so many other services in the home, like Wi-Fi, like free FAFSA and college applications for older siblings. We have multiple grade levels in the home. So if kids can, if their older sibling can get FAFSA or like college applications for their continued ed, then what are we doing to support the education development of kids that are the younger siblings? So I love sending these libraries home because we have great partnerships with the libraries, and public libraries are absolutely necessary. And we want to make sure that kids are getting that support in the house when they come home. So, covering and canvassing all those fronts, schools are doing a lot more to wrap around families to make sure they have supports that they need. And I think sending the readers home was just one example of how we're continuing to do that.
I love how you really took that perspective of the parent and said, they don't know that they should care because we haven't given them even enough information. And so making it really the school's responsibility, taking on that responsibility of teaching parents, this is what we want you to care about. And we want you to know about this before they even have to ask.
So what advice, if we were going to give district leaders some advice, right? What advice, because we could sit here talking all day, really. We really could. But what advice would you give other district leaders in regards to supporting literacy and the science of reading in their district?
Mm-hmm. I would say this is going to sound crazy and probably not good for the brands and all the other stuff, but I know it's like the brand, the science of reading, but I would honestly like make it more accessible to families. Like find your own language. Like I will shout out, and I mean, y'all could say we're there, we're not there, whatever, but I will shout out my sister soup, for which I'm a part of a network of a lot of women superintendents. So we effectively call each other sister soup, but I will shout out my sister soup, Keisha Scarlett in St. Louis. And she has an initiative called Literacy in the Lou. And it's just so fun. It's like great. She did a great video. It's like a huge literacy campaign. And it's not the science of reading in the loo. It's just like literacy in the loo, like brand it and make it something fun. For us, we have like RH reads or like our like snuggle up and read. So I think there are some really great things that you can do to make it feel like it's yours, right? The science of reading is literally just research. It's research. It's what we've been doing. And it feels like parents will come and be like, are you guys doing the science of reading?
Yeah.
Like big S, big R, big O. And you're just like, yes, we're teaching your children how to read with evidence-based practices. And evidence, like longitudinal evidence-based. Like we've never done any of the other stuff. I mean, maybe you might have bought a package off of an infomercial, but we didn't do that. We didn't tell you to do that. So, you might have bought a website or an internet, digital support, but we didn't do that. So, we are still doing the things that are evidence-based practices. And so through that, you have like some engagement for families. You have something that's accessible for families and community members, bring people in to partner with you around that. Really think less of the practitioner way that we think about things. Many of us have terminal degrees. We're all about the research and the literacy and the literature. And that is cool to vet, right? On the back end, we're vetting our resources. We're making sure they're high quality. They align their evidence-based practices. But what families really want to know is my child being set up to be successful across disciplines, right? Are they being set up to really be able to understand, analyze, and pull text out together, right? Are they able to really make judgments? Are they able to really think critically about text because they have that foundational word recognition, skilled reading approach? And that is the thing, right? I've seen like PE teachers and literacy teachers come together in the gym and do what? What do? They 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 do the rope, right? I have seen like people do double dutch and like do phonics. Like I've seen all kinds of fun ways that we're engaging families in some very technical aspects of reading instruction, but making it fun for them, right? And so that's my advice to superintendents is don't just say like we're doing a science of reading, like own it, make it yours, bring the kids in, bring the families in, bring solution providers, partners in to really help you think about how that shows up in the classroom and how it can look at home too.
I am just awestruck. I think we both are.
You guys are so funny.
Well, I just think like, and we're going to wrap this up, but I just think that because you come from not such a typical journey into education, like many of us as educators, you have such different perspectives that you bring to this work that are really just so innovative and so clear and so
intentional.
They're working. And I think that that's just beautiful. It's really, really great.
Thank you. I go back to, I'm just kind of put a bow on it. I go back to storytelling, right? Like, which is ironic, right? We're talking about reading and storytelling. And part of literacy is, there is this very technical, these components to reading, right? But what we ultimately want our students to do is to own their own identities, to be able to tell their own stories. And part of that is learning other people's stories, is reading other stories, right? You learn a whole lot about who you are and who you don't want to be and who you're not, windows and mirrors, through books, through just understanding another person's story. And so for me, my favorite book that I read that like unlocked a love of reading for me was by Jacqueline Woodson. And I just like was like, whoa, and it's Maison at Blue Hill. And I just literally could not believe that story about this girl who really seemed a lot like me at 10 years old. I went to school in the suburb and I was the only little Black girl in there, and she was at like a boarding school, and it was just about identity. Like it was so good. And so what we hope for our children, what we hope for our communities are really anchored in their ability to consume and then create stories. And so reading is a huge part of that.
You're so right. At the end of the day, all of our educators and parents, and we all want the same thing. We want our kids to be able to read and to love to read and then use that to create their own. So before we hop off, Dr. Mullen, what else should people know about what's happening in Rush Henrietta Central School District?
So there's so much, right? Like we are just doing the day-to-day work, but I think one of the really big pieces that we're doing, which is not fully aligned, but just thinking about our economic development, our workforce development, our pathways for educators. We want this new Generation A, I guess, Alpha, we want them to really think about education as a viable pathway. We want them to think about ways in which contributing to the next generation is a thing that actually propels our community and our world forward. And part of that, I go back to storytelling, right, is seeing their identity in the classroom, because we know that people who have a really negative experience with school probably are not going to want to come back in any capacity, like to teach or even like meet with their child's teacher. They're like, I hated school and I don't want to come back. So we really want to continue to think about how we can build a pathway forward for the next generation of not just readers, but like educators as well, right? When kids love their teachers and they love school, they're just like, I want to come back. I want to be here all the time. So that's what we're also thinking about as well.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
That's
What
all
questions?
Go
on.
All right, go ahead, Terry.
Are there any questions that we did not ask that you wanted us to ask?
No, I think this was great. I love talking about reading. I love talking about the work we're doing in RH. Anytime I get to share my story, I love it because hopefully someone else is encouraged and inspired. So thank you for inviting me to this platform. I don't take it lightly. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being here. We have learned so much from, you're just such an intentional leader. And so thank you for sharing the ways that you find the roots of problems. And until next time on the Science of Reading Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for joining us. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We will see you next time on Science of Reading Leadership, guiding minds, transforming lives.